the best tip to give people who are struggling with product management is to be curious, to ask a lot of questions, to understand that their stakeholders are also humans just like them and may have various incentives or goals that they might not be aware of, or might have some situation somewhere at work or at home that people might not know about. So just being curious, having empathy, and finding out as much as you can about your stakeholder. And I think that can be universally applied. So for me, I encountered a lot of product managers in my career who could use a book like this, who struggled with product management and didn't have frameworks or techniques. And when I managed those people, I could help them out. But I have the feeling that there are a lot more product managers out in the world who struggle with this. And I looked for a book because I wanted to buy a book. I looked buying books for people on my team and I couldn't find one. So I decided that one must be written. I think, especially as you advance in your career, more of your product management role is coordinating and aligning with other
Mm.
people. So at the beginning, you may be more doing tasks or things that are assigned, if you will. But as you progress in your career, it's more about, okay, what should we be doing? What do other people think? What's going on in the broader company and the broader industry? And so working with stakeholders is super critical. Another point is that even if you have the best roadmap or the best strategy, but you haven't talked to marketing about it, you haven't talked to sales about it, or customer support is not prepared for your launch, then it's not going to be successful. So product management, really creating anything, is a team sport. And so you need to learn how to work with your team. In my consulting work, I worked with a client who came up with this really great product strategy. And he presented it in front of the CEO and the head of marketing and the head of customer success. And they all had a ton of questions. And the problem was that he didn't review it with them in advance. So it was this big bang reveal. And at that point, development was going to start that week, right? So he didn't really have enough time to make the corrections he needed to make to satisfy the team. And not just to satisfy the team, but to really be the right solution for everybody, not just the customers, right? Customers are critical stakeholders, but there's also stakeholders inside the company that are required to make things work. If you don't align your strategy with your stakeholders in advance, is that they don't understand it. They don't want it. They don't realize why they need it because you haven't told them why. You've just said, here it is.
Yep.
And so if you align along the way with your stakeholders and involve them in the process, not just tell them what it is and ask for their feedback, but get them involved in what should we be doing, then everybody feels like they're a part of it and they feel bought in, and you're much more successful because it's the product of the team, not just you introducing something. Saying no is really difficult because you don't want to disappoint people. But the problem is that if you can't do the thing or it's not the right choice, saying no at the beginning is much better than saying maybe or yes and then just not doing it, because you'd rather disappoint people right at the beginning than having them wait and expect something and then disappoint them at the
Yep.
end. So saying no early is critically important for positive stakeholder relationships. It sounds counterintuitive, but it's true. And ideally, you would work together with your stakeholders to come to that no conclusion.
Mm.
Have them go through the process with you, have them along with you consider all the different options, consider why you might do it or why you might not do it, compare the thing they're asking for to all the other things you're doing and the relative value of those things, and say, hey, where would you prioritize this relative to the things we're already doing or relative to the other things you've already asked for? Because we have limited resources. And usually, if you do that, you can come to this conclusion together logically. But if it's something that they're just not buying into, then sometimes you have to figure out how to say no in a way that speaks to them based on who they are, based on their position in the company, based on their role, based on their particular motivations. And that goes back to the beginning of being curious. If you know your stakeholder well, you can figure out how to position the no in a way that speaks to them. Having those stakeholders who are not in your direct product team, like marketing and sales, involved with the road mapping process. Maybe not every single part, maybe not every single step, but at least at the beginning,
Mm.
right? What are the things that we think we want to do? What things are important? And you can do this as a group. You can do it one on one. You can do a combination. I think shuttle diplomacy is great here. You go to your stakeholders one by one and say, hey, what's most important to you this quarter or this year, right? What are your goals? What are you hoping to accomplish? And then the work of the product manager is to bring those things together and figure out what the plan should be. Some people think that you go around to your stakeholders and you figure out what they want and then you put a bit of everything in the roadmap. That's not exactly the case. What you should do is figure out what's important to each person and align that with what the business objectives are. If you don't have business objectives, you should start the process to get them. Align that with what the customer needs are and what the technical capabilities are.
Mm.
So it's a lot to bring together. You're not going to be able to do everything for everybody. You may not be able to do anything for some people, but at least acknowledging their needs and listening to them and showing them that you hear them and that you recognize what their needs are is a big step towards getting alignment, even if you don't do the thing that they're asking for.
Mm.
If you've spoken with all your stakeholders and you think they're all wrong and you decide to do something totally different, that's probably not going to be met with a lot of smiles. However, if you think they're all wrong and you go through one on one and try to understand better why they think the opposite of you, you may find that some people are more flexible than you thought. And you may find that some people are going along with the crowd. So I think that one on one relationships with those stakeholders is important because they may not be willing to say what they really think in front of the group.
Mm.
You may find that there is one or two particularly powerful stakeholders, power players, we call them in the book, who have just this outsized influence on everybody else. And finding a way to influence those power players may actually help the rest of the group go along with it. I think there are also situations where if everybody thinks something other than you may have to disagree and commit. You may have to say, okay, let's try it that way. Everybody seems to agree. There must be something to it. Let's try it, right? But how are we going to know we're
Mm.
successful? How do we measure success? How do we know when it's time to pivot? Can we do this as an experiment just to see, right? You don't have to go all in. You can say, all right, let's try it that way. And if by this date, these criteria are not met, then we'll try it. My stakeholder management is particularly difficult because everybody is different. And the way that you prefer to communicate may not be the way that your stakeholders prefer to communicate. For example, I think a lot of the difficulty in stakeholder management are similar to the difficulty in managing people, in that you have to adjust your approach for different people. And that's hard because they're different than you. And it's hard for you to put yourself in other people's shoes. For example, if your stakeholder loves data and they're like, just show me the numbers, but you're not really a data person. You're more like, why can't you just see the big picture? It's going to be hard to communicate. So you have to figure out how that person thinks, how that person makes their decisions, and adjust your narrative to appeal to how they think.
That makes a lot of sense. So that's one reason why it's hard. Any other reasons you would want to cover?
I think stakeholder management is hard also because it's not something you can necessarily learn in school. It's not something they necessarily teach in school, but it's also not something you can learn without doing it. So I think that a lot of the educational programs and first few years out of school, you might have more like tasks assigned to you. And so it's a muscle that you have to work on over time and you have to learn over time. And it's something that you have to practice. So we thought about this as we were writing the book. And we said, okay, can you just read a book and know how to do stakeholder management? I think applying it in your job and using some of the techniques in your day to day work can help you figure out what works for you. And one of the things that we did in the book is to have a through line narrative with characters who develop over time to show one example of how these frameworks can be used in someone's day to day job. And I think that helps guide the reader through the exercises in terms of an ongoing example with characters that you get to know throughout the book. Maybe how you're doing stakeholder management well is that you're making progress, that you're removing
Right.
roadblocks, that people, not necessarily everybody's agreeing because alignment isn't about agreeing, but everybody is agreeing to move forward with the decisions that have been made and agreeing to follow the plan that has been set by the team.
Mm.
So I think getting more alignment means that you're doing better with stakeholder management, and alignment means that they're willing to go along with your plan and that they support it and that they are happy to be part of the team. So you're always going to get requests from stakeholders for more stuff. Stakeholders and everybody tends to think in terms of solutions instead of problems. So when you're faced with more solutions being requested, the best way to maintain some sense of stability in your roadmap is to have your roadmap from the beginning be based on aligned
Uh,
goals and an aligned set of problems to solve, because that allows you to say no without it being your opinion or your preference. It's we've aligned on these goals. This new request doesn't match those goals. So we should table it for later because it doesn't match what our objectives are. Or we've decided that these customer problems are the most important ones because we've determined what their value is to solve, both to the customer and to the business. This request doesn't solve one of these problems. So let's talk about whether or not it's actually higher priority than what we're working
sure.
on now.
Mm.
And I think having those conversations from the point of view of we've already aligned on what we're working on, does this fit? Helps it be a mutual decision rather than you just saying no to somebody. So if a stakeholder changes their mind later or is inconsistent with their opinions on something or agrees, but you're not quite sure they really mean it, I think there are a couple of things that are possibly going on. One is they might not be comfortable voicing their opinions in a group. So one on one conversation can often help there. Two is really building a trusting relationship with them so that they can feel comfortable telling you what's really on their mind, that they believe that you're not going to say something bad about them because they voiced that opinion, psychological safety, and also that they trust you enough not to share something that they've told you in confidence. There's a bunch of techniques that we talk about in the book. We call them mining for conflict, which are techniques that you can use, especially in group settings, but also one on one, to get the team to voice their concerns where they might not otherwise do. For example, you can get everybody to give at least one reason why the thing we're talking about is not going to work. So why would it not work? And some people may feel more comfortable saying voicing their concerns if everybody is expected to voice at least one concern at the same time.